We're going to begin with some breaking news from Ottawa regarding the fate of a number of Canadians who have been detained in northeastern Syria. CBC News has confirmed there's now a timeline for their repatriation. The group is made up of 6 Canadian women and their 13 children. The CBC's Karina Roman is covering this story for us. Karina, what do we know about this deal so far?
Well, the lawyer for the 6 women and their 13 children who are detained in Syria say that the families who were bringing these people's case to federal court are going to discontinue that application before the court because a deal has been reached between the government and his clients. A mutually acceptable resolution is what he said, within a mutually acceptable time frame. So Global Affairs Canada, the government, for the government and the applicants have come to this deal. Now, before this case went to federal court in December, there was the revelation of a document filed in court from the government that showed that these people actually met this 2021 government threshold for what they called extraordinary assistance. So it seemed like the government was open to finally repatriate these people. But the court case went ahead, and in that court case, the government had argued that it has no obligation to repatriate them. But now there is this deal, this agreement to repatriate. As I said, the timeline has also been agreed to. We are not being told what the timeline is for security reasons. I should point out that there are 4 Canadian men who are part of this federal court case as well. They are not part of this deal, so their court case will continue. And just to remind viewers of the background, I mean, these women and men went over to Syria to either join or support ISIS. And then, the Kurdish fighters reclaimed that part of Syria and are the ones who are running these detention camps of these people. The Kurds have been asking the Canadian government to repatriate their Canadian citizens for a long time now.
Okay, so we know that there's very strong opinions and lobbies involved in this case. Karina, I wonder if you can describe to us the kind of pressure the federal government was facing on this.
Well, yeah, there's the mindset of, well, these people chose to go support a terrorist organization, and basically they should reap the consequences over there and rot over there in the detention camps. But human rights advocates and groups argue that these are Canadian citizens. They were in inhumane conditions for years, and that they need to be repatriated and face criminal consequences here, if that includes charges. In fact, I should mention 2 women and their children were already repatriated in October, and both those women were charged shortly after coming back to Canada. Now, it's not clear whether these 6 women coming back with their 13 children will be charged or not. And so that was, of course, that question was put to the lawyer, Lawrence Greenspan. This is what he had to say.
Certainly, the government has the ability, if they have the evidence and if they choose to prosecute, they certainly have a department of lawyers and paralegals, so they can do that.
So we'll see what happens once they are brought back. But the government was also under pressure because many advocates would say, the men and the women who went over did so as adults, knowing what they were doing. But the children that have been born in the meantime had no choice in this. And they, too, were in these detention camps. And they're innocent children. And so they needed to be brought back with at least one parent. And that's why the women are coming back as well. Now, I also mentioned there was also pressure because Canada was starting to become an outlier in this. Many Western nations had been repatriating their citizens and then having them face charges back in their countries. And Canada had been an outlier on this. So there was also that pressure to, you no longer had an excuse if other countries were doing that.
Okay, CBC's Karina Roman in Ottawa. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's stick to the story and bring in Farida Deef. She is the director of Human Rights Watch Canada, and we've reached her in Toronto. Farida, good to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Farida, this is a story that ignites a lot of emotion, a lot of reaction about these Canadian women being repatriated back to this country. I wonder what your response is.
Well, I think it's a very important decision that was made for family members here in Canada who have seen their loved ones, their brothers and sisters and cousins and grandchildren abandoned in camps and prisons in northeast Syria for 4 years now, in some cases even longer. It's certainly a very important step in the right direction that the government and came to an agreement to repatriate a group of women and children who are part of this lawsuit. I think what's really important to remember is that there are a number of women and children and men as well who are not part of this lawsuit, and there are 4 men who are part of the lawsuit who are not being repatriated right now. So it's very important for us to ensure that everyone is repatriated. All of these Canadians have spent the past 4 years in squalid, life-threatening conditions, conditions the United Nations has called inhumane, amounting to torture. And in all of these cases, no one has been charged with a crime. No one has even been brought before a judge. So they're all arbitrarily detained Canadians that have been essentially abandoned in northeast Syria for the past 4 years.
Frida, you know very well that people are going to push back on that, and they're going to say these are individuals, adults, maybe the children are innocent, but adults who chose to give up their Canadian identity and go join what they thought at the time was going to be a new country, a new Islamic state, whose laws are very contradictory to that of the modern Western world. So if they made that choice, should they not live with the consequences of that choice and stay in Syria, in those prison camps?
Well, nobody should be unlawfully detained. No one should be tortured, despite what reasons they may have had to travel to Syria, to be there. Canada has a robust judicial system, a robust law enforcement. All of these individuals are arbitrarily detained right now. As I said, they've never been charged with a crime. If there is evidence that they should be prosecuted, they should be do so at home in Canada. They should be repatriated, reintegrated, rehabilitated, and anyone who may have committed crimes can be prosecuted here in Canada. Simply abandoning them in this legal limbo, being held in squalid camps and prisons by a non-state actor indefinitely is really an untenable situation. It really is not the right thing to do. Other governments are repatriating their nationals, recognizing that they can't simply abandon their responsibility and outsource their responsibility for their nationals to this non-state actor, that we have a robust judicial system. This could be dealt with here in Canada. And certainly the children are victims first and foremost.
So Frida, from a human rights perspective, when these women do get repatriated, what is, from your point of view, the right thing to do? Because certainly there will be calls for them to be criminally prosecuted for joining ISIS, for what they may or may not have done in the Middle East. And how do you maintain the human rights of these individuals while still acknowledging that there's a real security concern for a lot of people with their repatriation?
Well, I mean, I think the courts are going to be able to handle this quite well as law enforcement, to ensure that from a national security perspective, that these individuals are monitored if necessary, if warranted. Anyone who committed crimes can be prosecuted for those crimes in Canada. But certainly you have children and as well as adults who have experienced unimaginable horrors under ISIS. You have individuals who may have been trafficked to northeast Syria. That should also be taken into consideration. The children are first and foremost victims. They shouldn't be re-traumatized as part of their repatriation. They shouldn't be separated from their mothers unless that's in their best interest. There should be mechanisms put in place to ensure that they are taken care of upon repatriation. Anyone who was trafficked, who experienced sexual or other forms of violence under ISIS should also be taken into account, and all of that should be part of the assessment of what happens to these individuals upon their return.
Frida Deef is the director of Human Rights Watch Canada. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.